Hey, what's going on, everybody? Bringing back Connor O'Gara here from Saturday Down South. Talk about Texas A&M. What's going on, man?
Not a whole lot, great time of year to be talking about Aggie football. Nothing really crazy going on in College Station right now or anything. Everything is just kind of business as usual. Nobody's talking about the fact that Jimbo Fisher still owed $86 million on that contract. Everything is just kind of fine right now.
Yeah, I think both teams will be okay with the loss on this one, right? No. Miami comes into the game 2-0 on the season, 13th in the country. Texas A&M dropped to 24 in the AP poll, 1-1. Games on Saturday, 9 o'clock ESPN there, 9 o'clock Eastern time. Let's get right into it. Definitely, we're going to talk about quarterback Connor, but just maybe your thoughts on there's always overreaction with what happened last game, but maybe what's the fair assessment on where Texas A&M, not just going into this game, but just kind of what we've seen these first 2 weeks. And I can say I've watched both of the games, obviously watched Miami. So there's a lot to get into that I want to talk about from when we talked in the spring, but just what are some fair criticisms and maybe what's the stuff that's a little over the top with the assessment right now?
Well, if there are signs of offensive life in College Station, I sure as heck have not seen them. When you gain 9 first downs in a game at home against a group of five team, after you're pretty much lackluster week one. I mean, let's call it what it is against Sam Houston. And to come out the way that they did, have no sense of urgency, have no troubleshooting ability. That's the biggest knock I always have against Jimbo Fisher is that this offense didn't change anything. Where are the unique looks for Anais Smith? Where are the plays to get Devon Achane the ball in space? Why is it so difficult to get the ball to these wide receivers? Is it just as simple as they can't get separation yet? Because it's year five. That's still a Jimbo Fisher problem. Why does it look like everything Haynes King does is so difficult? Certain guys make the quarterback position look easy to play. He doesn't yet. And this is year three in the system. I get it. He's still a young starter in terms of games played, but it is just really difficult to watch this A&M offense do much of anything. And if we don't see Max Johnson in this one, I'll be surprised.
Let's talk about that quarterback situation. And such an interesting game last week with the under 40 offensive snaps. And I actually looked at the count there that they get that kick return for a touchdown, but Haynes was on the bench for 50 minutes of real time in the second half. And then they come right out. They go shotgun right there and they fumble away, and kind of a difficult play to pull off right there, and just couldn't hold on to all kinds of stuff. Everyone from Texas A&M knows all about what's going on, and Miami's kind of aware with what's going on too. And Miami's got its things too going into this one, even though they are 2-0. Quarterback situation, I do want to talk about Haynes, obviously, but let's talk about Max. What does he bring to the team if they do make that move? Type of season he had a year ago, and maybe how he could maybe change things if they do make that switch.
Yeah, I always say Max Johnson had the most casual 27-6 TD9 ratio in the history of college football. You would never know that that's what he did last year, but it kind of became this source of frustration for LSU fans because, yeah, that on the surface looks good, but what he would often do is he would fixate on Kayshon Boutte, who's one of the probably three or four best receivers in all of college football when he's right. And to see the way that this offense didn't really progress was a source of frustration because Max Johnson was in year two last year at LSU. But the reason why wasn't retained as the starter was because his upside is somewhat limited with his arm coming from the left side, the way that he is able to get the ball out of his hands quickly. It's kind of been a sore subject, I think, for the LSU fans who thought he was going to be an even better player. And now you wonder, well, has he mastered the Jimbo Fisher offense? What really is the Jimbo Fisher offense in a post Jameis Winston world? Because it ain't a top 30 passing offense. It hasn't been since Jimbo Fisher left. He hasn't had an all conference quarterback since Jameis Winston left either. So I look at those things and I say, as much as I would love to tell you, I know exactly what to expect from Haynes King if he comes into this football game, a guy who likes to be able to work his first and second read and then kind of maybe tuck it and run. I don't even know if we can expect that, because if there's just more confusion for the Jimbo Fisher offense, then we're just going to get a more disjointed A&M offensive performance in this one.
Connor, when we talked in the spring, you said this quarterback battle was, arguably the most intriguing in the country. And now here we are 2 weeks in, it seems right there too.
Yeah.
It's still very intriguing of what they're going to do. And we haven't talked about if they're going to give Connor a shot, but with Max and Haynes, they bring something different to the table. Can you maybe talk about their games and if they are in there, kind of the differences with these two guys in addition to righty lefty?
Yeah, in addition to that, I mean, that's kind of the obvious thing when you look at them. Haynes King is a phenomenal athlete. I mean, he's really, really athletic. He was getting Justin Fields comps coming out of high school in Texas. Like, that's the type of athleticism that we're talking about here. The problem is if they don't really feature him in a lot of those different sets with the RPO and you don't really get him running in space and calling those some of those design keepers, then what's the point of all that athleticism? Yeah, sometimes it's good when everything breaks down, but those are kind of few and far between. So yeah, ideally A&M would be able to utilize that athleticism, and you would use some of these RPO slants with Max Johnson. I've always thought that's kind of where he thrives. It's a little bit similar to, and on a much lesser degree, I want to make that perfectly clear. But when you used to watch Tua run the Steve Sarkisian offense, and you would see these RPO slants that just looked automatic and they didn't look fair, Max Johnson can execute that at a pretty high level. And ideally, he would like Haynes King to be able to execute that, but I don't really think that he can at this stage in his career. He's not accurate enough to do that yet. Max Johnson is definitely a more accurate quarterback than Haynes King is, but both of them, I think, are going to have some struggles in this Jimbo Fisher offense, which has just made scoring and sustaining drives look really difficult at times this year.
Whoever's at quarterback, if they can it just feels like if they can get the ball to the wide receivers, there's ability there, particularly the speed. I know they're not really featuring guys that are, the big receiver. They do have Marshall, but it's pretty much these other guys, Anaya Smith and Evan Stewart certainly looks like the real deal. And everyone knows about Keith Brown down here. Lane's getting a lot of reps too. Those receivers, are there some things that they can do to maybe help out this quarterback situation? And also, if you can kind of speak on them, obviously you're high on Smith there, but maybe what Evan's been bringing to the table. Have you been surprised, even though he was a highly regarded guy?
Yeah, I mean, look, I wrote a column a few months ago kind of poo-pooing this idea that Evan Stewart was going to step into the SEC and dominate. And I think that's based on the history of Jimbo Fisher and true freshman receivers. If you remember, Damon Demas was the 5-star true freshman who everybody at A&M was like, all right, this guy's going to be the next Mike Evans. And then he comes in there and it just never really worked out. And he hit the transfer portal, he had some off the field issues as well. But Jimbo Fisher has not had, I believe, a true freshman receiver have more than like 400 receiving yards in the season since 2014, I want to say. I mean, it's bad. So they're putting a lot of emphasis on Evan Stewart when I don't know that he's particularly ready for that. And I don't know if he can get separation against some of these outside corners. He's not a guy that has overpowering size or anything like that. But the guy that's the best bet to move the chains is still Anaya Smith. The problem is that he operates mostly out of the slot. He's not a go up and get it 50-50 ball type of guy. They don't really have that. They also lost Caleb Chapman, who hit the transfer portal before the year, and he was kind of their deep threat. And now you're kind of looking around going, man, you have a lot of receivers that you've kind of lost that identity of what exactly they are. And they're still trying to figure out what their own identities are. So I don't really think the depth is there. When people were putting them in the top 10 in the preseason, that I said that was a bit ridiculous because I think that's an area that they need to improve on and get more talent in there because it certainly has not panned out so far.
And it doesn't seem, through 2 games, just not getting that production like they did a year ago at that tight end spot, which certainly helped. And just having that big target. We talked about that a lot with Miami, just the diversity of the offense, and they've not had a bigger receiver for a while. It's kind of changing a little bit now, but it's tough when you kind of have the same type of guys, even as dynamic as those guys are. With the running game, it's very interesting. Obviously, there's a lot of praise coming into the year with what Devin's been able to do. Coming into the year, it's his numbers are impressive. Everyone knows his measurables. What are you seeing now, though, that's not quite clicking with the run game with him, the offensive line, whatever it might be, even though he does obviously have that track record and the potential to break out at any moment in any game?
Devon Achane has all-American upside. I mean, he really does. He is not just a speed guy. He runs like a 10.400 meter. I mean, he's got world-class speed. I don't remember what that number is. Don't quote me on that. But he is incredibly fast in the open field. And if you see him on that 95-yard kickoff return that he took for a touchdown, that was A&M's only points in the second half. You're like, okay, I understand it. He runs through contact very, very well. The problem is that he's not necessarily a guy who's going to be able to make a lot of things happen behind the line of scrimmage and have some of that shiftiness that you might need right now for this A&M offensive line, which is by no means an impose their will type of line. If you go back to what they had in 2020 with the Maroon Goons and all of that continuity that they had and all those veterans that they had, this is a very different group. And Jimbo Fisher said last year that there was more upside with this group We're not seeing it yet. And they have really kind of struggled. They lost Kenyon Green, who was their best offensive lineman last year. And he was expected to be kind of this all-American type guy that didn't necessarily pan out. But you kind of wonder now, well, what's their identity? Because, yeah, you can get Devon Achane the ball 15 to 20 times a game, and that's great for what he is. But the problem is that if those running lanes aren't there, you're not really giving him an opportunity to do what he does best, which is get to the open field and get to the second level to hit those home run plays.
And from a Miami standpoint, we're certainly going to get to the Texas A&M defense. From a Miami standpoint, the linebackers, they've come into the year not expected to do a lot, but they've been kind of solid. But this is a game where they're going to be tested. The secondary, they have some bigger corners. It'll be interesting, and they've been giving up some deep passes. So certainly they've got to be careful with that. They've got the bigger corners. It'll be interesting to see how they match up against kind of these speed guys that A&M has. And Coach Cristobal has talked a lot about their speed already. The O-line, D-line, Miami, is going to roll out a bunch of guys on the D-line, 15 to 20 snaps a piece, and try to get the most out of it. And, even though Texas A&M's coming on with that big line, like you said, they've kind of struggled so far. Flipping it to defense, Connor, overall, just kind of overall takeaways, it certainly seems impressive. Numbers are still good. They do give up the run yards last game, but still under 4 yards a carry for, even though the numbers kind of piled up there, but over 50 carries a lot. Your thoughts on maybe this front seven, what you're seeing here, and then we'll get into the secondary, but this front seven and defending pass rush and also the run here.
A&M had to replace basically that entire defensive line. I mean, that defensive line was good. People forget the Aggies were the number 3 scoring defense in the country last year. And I was with Mike Elko, who, of course, is now the head coach at Duke. So you replace this entire defensive line, and they've got a lot of youth up front. They signed arguably the best defensive line class ever in a 24/7 sports era, like ever. So the thing that A&M is still trying to figure out is, okay, can these guys stack up against that Power 5 competition? We haven't seen them play a Power 5 team yet. So it's still a little bit tough to tell because they weren't able to necessarily get off the field in some of those key spots. But then it's like, well, if you look at their time of possession in that game, and those guys are on the field the entire time. So I give them a little bit of a pass. What DJ Durkin, the new defensive coordinator for Texas A&M, is trying to do is trying to create some of these unique situations on third down. Well, they'll send Antonio Johnson from on a blitz, and they'll send him kind of rushing off the edge, or they'll send him from the second level. He's kind of their stud on the back end. Imani Richardson also really good as well. But that's kind of the creative ways they've drawn up to be able to get pressure on the quarterback, which, that defensive line hasn't necessarily been able to do that. They can't just get pressure with 3 or 4 the way that they could last year. And that's the biggest difference. I knew they were going to regress defensively. That was a really solid group, especially up front. But now to see kind of the different things that their young group is doing, you're encouraged, but at the same time, you're realizing this isn't necessarily a group that's good enough to pull its weight and win a game 10-7. That's being asked to do an awful lot if this offense isn't going to take the next step.
Antonio Johnson, you touched on the way they move him around, his skill set. Can you explain more about essentially how good he is and what he brings to a defense with what he's able to do in different spots there?
He's just a football player. I mean, he is a 6'3" slot receiver and who covered at an extraordinary level last year. And so he was, for those who actually watched A&M kind of up close, and they had a lot of household names up front, and DeMarvin Leal, Jaden Peavy, they saw Antonio Johnson take that next step and become that guy. Now he's played a little bit more of that safety type role. He'll line up on the defensive line, like I was talking about. He'll line up in the box. He'll line up at slot corner still. I mean, he can kind of do it all. He's a little bit of like a Grant Delpit type of guy for that defense. And I think that they need him to play at an all-American level if they are going to be able to kind of sustain what they have coming up. And that A&M schedule coming up is absolutely brutal, more so from a defensive mind standpoint. But Antonio Johnson is a stud. He is a game changer. And if you don't account for him, that probably in those 3 or 4 instances, then he's going to blitz the quarterback. He can separate the football from the quarterback and make a game-changing play. But he'll be everywhere. Miami fans will know exactly who he is, number 27, by the end of the game.
And you touched on Richardson there at safety. Chappelle looks like he's a good corner. So and this is where I think it's going to be interesting from a Miami standpoint is I don't think they've got their receivers clicking the way they'd like, or ideally going into a game like this. I could see them really struggling against the run like they've done in previous games against good teams with athletic defenses. So we'll see. That's kind of what's going to happen. Can Miami be a 2-dimensional offense? Or are they going to get bottled up against the run and kind of put it all in Van Dyke's hands? Connor, before I wrap this up, keys for Texas A&M, particularly early on, to create some sort of momentum. They're going to have the crowd there. Night game, it's going to have essentially a crazy atmosphere. But what's kind of key for A&M early on to maybe watch for?
2 scoring drives to start off. You need it. I mean, badly, because the longer you go in this game without scoring, the more angsty that crowd is going to be. And instead of having a home field advantage, it's going to be 105,000 angsty A&M fans, and understandably so after what they witnessed last week. And so that's the thing that you have to avoid. You can't have that slow offensive start. It's one thing if you let up a touchdown on the opening drive. I expect Miami to get off to a pretty good start here. That would not necessarily surprise me at all. But I think if you're A&M, whether it's Max Johnson or Haynes King, I don't care who's starting a quarterback, you need those 2 starting drives to kind of settle in and show, all right, we're able to figure some things out. Get that offensive line feeling good. Get these skill players involved. Get one of those 8-9 play drives where you actually complete 3 or 4 passes, something like that. This offense needs rhythm, and it has no rhythm at all right now. Play with a little tempo, maybe. Could we see some of that? Would Jimbo Fisher be so bold as to actually make an adjustment from game to game? We'll wait and see. But that is the key for me opening up this game, to be able to come out and look like an offense that actually has a clue.
Certainly a fascinating game going into the season, the way it shaked out already. Miami's going to, they're expected to win. I know the fan base, maybe they thought they wouldn't win this one. It is going to be a tough one, but now they're ranked higher. They're going to look at App State, and Miami fans are going to feel like they're better than them, so they should win this. It should be that simple, but it doesn't work like that. So challenging on both sides, both fan bases, both teams looking to get a big win here. A lot of things can happen. Connor, your time is valuable. I appreciate you jumping on here. Take care, man.
Absolutely appreciate it, man.